Ijumaa moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili, Washington.
Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Tuesday, January 17th. This is Africa 54.
Nigerians are rushing to get their voting cards ahead of the February 25th presidential election. The annual World Economic Forum gets underway in Davos, Switzerland, with calls for more investments in developing countries to stem global inequality. And in health, hundreds of thousands died of malaria in Africa in 2022, according to a new report. We'll have an expert weigh in on the fight against malaria amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
Fighters from Al-Shabaab stormed a military base Tuesday, killing at least 7 soldiers, including the base commander. Assailants rammed the base in the village of Hawadle with a suicide car bomb and then opened fire. The base is located about 60 kilometers north of the capital, Mogadishu, and was taken away from the Al-Shabaab last October by government forces and allied clan militias. The government announced on Monday that it had captured Haradir, an Al-Shabaab stronghold on the Indian Ocean coast that it had held for a decade. Now for more on the increased Al-Shabaab attacks in Somalia, I'm joined live via Skype from Washington by Haroon Maruf, VOA senior Somali editor. Haroon, tell us more about the recent spate of Al-Shabaab attacks in Somalia.
Yeah, this attack was very early this morning. This military base, they have used a tactic they have been using for a long time, that is detonating car bombs on the military base, and then they stormed the base. According to the government, 5 soldiers were killed, including a senior military commander. The government said it repulsed the attack and killed 21 Al-Shabaab militants. Al-Shabaab claimed killing 63 government soldiers and confiscating weapons and military vehicles. It's always very difficult to verify casualty figures given by both sides, but we understand that the fighting between the two sides, the government military offensive, Al-Shabaab retaliatory attacks are increasing by the day.
Do we know more about this commander? Was he targeted or was this a random attack?
The commander was the lead officer, the most senior officer at the base. It was his soldiers that were attacking. He was at the base at the time. He's the commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 27th Division of the Somali National Army. But he's very well known, very well respected. He was not just a military, he was also helping the local community get support from aid agencies. Local officials praised him for that, but he was involved in the attacks and the operations against Al-Shabaab for a long time. He's a very well-known military officer in that area, and he's from that area as well.
Haroon, do we know if there are any incentives of any kind from authorities to help civilians, flush out these extremists that may very well be known to them?
That has been one of the most difficult tasks and challenges that was facing the country for many years, is to get the support of the locals on their side so that they can defeat Al-Shabaab. And Al-Shabaab, as we know, still controls vast area in the countryside. There are a lot of civilians in these areas. Al-Shabaab still taxes the local communities. They collect livestock from the local communities. One of the most senior former Al-Shabaab leaders once described Al-Shabaab like a fish that cannot survive without the community. So Al-Shabaab is going to fight to stay within the community. But the government is trying to get the locals on their side. Since August, locals have been mobilizing themselves to support the federal government, and that's how the government succeeded in driving Al-Shabaab out from more than 70 localities in the country. Yesterday, the government the voter capture in 2 key towns in the central regions. Today, government also captured another town. So the offensive is progressing, but Al-Shabaab is trying to halt this offensive by carrying out retaliatory attacks on isolated forward operating bases, including Hawadli, the base that they have attacked this morning.
Harun, thanks. Harun Maruf is a VOA senior Somali editor. Despite long lines, many Nigerians are hurrying to sign up and receive their voting identification cards for the nation's February 25th presidential election. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Nigerians are rushing to pick their voting cards ahead of next month's presidential and National Assembly elections. For the first time since the end of the military dictatorship in 1999, a third-party candidate is presenting a significant challenge to the dominance of the ruling Progressive Congress and prominent opposition People's Democratic Party. Nearly 10 million new voters are registered to vote in the upcoming elections, and 84% of them are under age 34, according to INEC.
Getting my PVC, it was actually very, very easy. Voting for the first time, I'm very excited to wanting to exercise my voting rights, voting the right people into government office to make Nigeria great and proud.
Crowds are gathered recently at many Lagos schools where election officials called out names, checked lists, and handed out the coveted biometric voter cards.
The need for change wasn't that high, but right now, something is very, very clear, that it's time that we transition to the younger generation ruling us. And that's why, if I don't do it now, when will I do it? And 4 years, the sacrifice of this period for 4 good years for the nation, I believe is worth the sacrifice, and I'm ready to play my part.
The Independent National Electoral Commission, known as INEC, last week extended the deadline for PVC collection by 8 days. It says at least 100,000 cards were collected in only 5 days in some states. Logistical delays, violence, and claims of fraud and vote buying have previously marred Nigeria's elections. However, election officials say 2023's ballot will be more than transparent after the introduction of electronic transfer of results and a biometric voter identification technology at the voting stations to stop fraud.
The new innovation we have now in INEC is the use of BVAS, that is the bimodal voter accreditation system. And we have put this to test. In our off-cycle elections, we had both in Ekiti State and Osun State. And this really instilled confidence in our people when they saw the way the machine worked maximally.
The winner of the presidential elections faces several tough challenges, from tackling nationwide insecurity to reviving an economy struck by financial fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine. Former State Governor Peter Obi, 61, is appealing to younger voters with a message that is different from his old guard rivals and wants to bring real change to Nigeria. Buhari's APC party is fielding Bola Tinubu, 70, a former governor known as the Godfather of Lagos, for his political influence and who is likely to benefit from the ruling party's national network. The PDP's Atiku Abubakar, 76, is a former vice president and a wealthy businessman on his 6th presidential bid. Meanwhile, security forces are fighting a 13-year-old war against jihadists in the country's northeast, bandit militias in the northwest, and separatist tensions in the southeast. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Supporters of the Zimbabwean opposition party Citizens Coalition for Change have appeared in court for a bail hearing after they were arrested for what the police say was unlawful gathering with intent to incite public violence. Olivia Zolino reports.
Supporters of Zimbabwe's opposition party were seen with their fingers in the air as they marched to court for a bail hearing on Monday. The gesture is a sign of support for their party, Citizens Coalition for Change, or CCC. 25 people, including 2 members of parliament, were arrested over the weekend for an unlawful gathering with intent to incite public violence. The CCC says tear gas was fired on them by police. Opposition supporters have increasingly faced a wave of politically motivated violence against them in rural Zimbabwe. It comes ahead of the presidential election this year, stoking fears of repression. Fedzai Mahiri is a spokeswoman for the CCC.
Almost every province, in fact every province of the country, we are seeing these escalated incidents of violence. We've said we want elections, we don't want war. And this does not bode well for a free and fair election.
Zimbabwean law requires political parties to notify authorities 2 weeks before holding a political meeting. The CCC's massive urban support is seen as a threat to the ruling Zimbabwe African National Union, Patriotic Front's 43-year hold on power.
That was Olivia Zolino of Reuters reporting. And we move on to the World Economic Forum is underway in Switzerland. And Oxfam, a global organization that fights inequality, extreme wealth and extreme poverty, have also increased simultaneously for the... I apologize, I'm lost on that. The World Economic Forum is underway in Switzerland, and Oxfam, a global organization that fights inequality to end poverty and injustice, says extreme wealth and extreme poverty have increased simultaneously for the first time in 25 years. The charity is calling for a fairer taxation amid soaring global inequality. And at the opening ceremony of the annual meeting in the Swiss mountain resort of Davos, actor Idris Elba and his wife Sabrina called for business and political leaders to provide more support to the world's poorest countries in the form of investment rather than aid. Both Elbas were honored for their work on environmental conservation, food security and climate change. The couple, who are goodwill ambassadors for the United Nations International Fund for Agricultural Development, appealed to participants at the annual summit for fast financial support for people hit by food scarcity and climate change.
And while we accept this award with deep gratitude, we are here at Davos to highlight the people and the countries who are not making the headlines as much as my husband. Somalia, my home country, is on the brink of famine. Millions of Yemeni children are acutely malnourished. Afghanistan, Central African Republic, DRC, Haiti, Sudan, South Sudan all face catastrophic levels of hunger. Hundreds of millions of people are being forced to flee their homes because of conflict, because of climate change, in some cases both.
The poor of this world are not just looking for aid and handouts. They are looking for investment. Investment in people, in nature, in innovation, in partnership. What Sabrina and I would like to leave with you today is, please do not lose courage. Okay? It takes stamina to stay the course. To the businesses, keep investing in mitigating climate change. As Sabrina said, please invest in small farms and the small to medium businesses that support. With greater access to finance, to markets, to resources, to technology, to knowledge, and to people, we can define a different future. Thank you so much.
Elba highlighted food crisis in Somalia, Sudan, Haiti and other countries, focusing on the plight of small-scale farmers without access to the resources they need and yet produce 1/3 of the planet's food. As the annual World Economic Forum gets underway this week in Davos, Switzerland, Oxfam says extreme wealth and extreme poverty have increased simultaneously for the first time in 25 years. The charity is calling for fairer taxation amid soaring global inequality, as Henry Ridgwell reports.
Hundreds of billionaires, dozens of government ministers and central bank governors are due to attend the World Economic Forum in Davos this week, seen as a get-together for the global super-rich. And the charity Oxfam says they are getting richer.
Davos is back in January. The Festival of Wealth is back. And we're bringing alarming new findings which show that the 1%, the richest 1% in the world, have grabbed nearly 2/3 of all new wealth created since 2020.
Oxfam says the source of that wealth is partly government money, emergency liquidity pumped into the global economy as the coronavirus pandemic forced countries into lockdown in 2020.
That was essential, but at the same time, the ultra-wealthy were able to really ride this asset boom that resulted, this stock market boom that resulted. And without the guardrails of progressive taxation in the economy, the ultra-wealthy were really able to line their pockets.
Oxfam calculates that at least 1.7 billion workers now live in countries where inflation is outpacing wages, meaning people are getting poorer. However, the wealth of billionaires has surged as inflation drives up food and energy prices.
We were able to show how 95 food and energy corporations have actually been able to double their profits in 2022.
Oxfam is calling for windfall taxes imposed on energy companies to be extended to food companies making big profits. It also wants a tax of up to 5% on the world's multi-millionaires and billionaires.
Extreme inequality is not inevitable, and a strategic precondition to a more equal world is taxing the ultra-wealthy. This isn't about nurses, teachers, the middle class. This is really about those at the very top, ensuring that they're paying far fairer taxes.
The organisers of the World Economic Forum insist the meeting does benefit everyone.
It's so much is at stake. We really need to find solutions on the wars and conflicts. But we also have to secure that we don't go into a recession and we have 10 years of low growth as we had in the 1970s. That is at stake, and we need all the stakeholders to be part of working towards a safer and more inclusive, growing global economy.
The World Bank warned in October that progress in tackling extreme poverty has ground to a halt amid soaring inflation and slowing economic growth. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
In other news, Egypt's economy is in crisis. Its currency is in free fall. Inflation is skyrocketing. Its poor is being hit hard, and the middle class is teetering on the brink of disaster. The Egyptian pound has lost half of its value against the dollar since March, following a devaluation demand as part of a $3 billion IMF loan agreement. Madagascar's Widened, an off-grid solar company, says it has secured $20 million to connect 50,000 households to electricity in the next 2 years. Widened, which allows customers to prepay for their electricity through mobile banking, is targeting the 90% of the island's nation's rural population without access to power. And South African Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says so-called Stage 6 power cuts, which mean at least 6 hours a day without power for most South Africans, will no longer be needed within about 5 months as facilities are revamped and measures such as demand management take effect. Britain's High Court has granted permission to a group of asylum seekers to appeal against its decision that the government's plan to send migrants to Rwanda is unlawful. We get more in this report from Reuters.
Britain's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is heading to the Court of Appeal. The High Court in London ruled on Monday that a group of asylum seekers could appeal after it said the scheme was lawful last month.
Refugees are welcome here.
The government policy has been denounced by rights groups. It would involve Britain sending tens of thousands of migrants who arrive on its shores more than 4,000 miles away.
in Sudan, min Wayne.
The first planned deportation flight to Rwanda was blocked in June last year by a last-minute European Court of Human Rights ruling. It imposed an injunction preventing any deportations until the conclusion of legal action in the UK. Migration has often dominated Britain's political discourse and is likely to feature heavily in campaigns for the next national election expected in 2024. Figures showed more than 40,000, a record number, crossed from France last year, including those from Iran and Afghanistan. On Monday, claimants were granted permission to appeal on various grounds. That includes whether the High Court was wrong to decide the Rwanda removal policy was not systematically unfair, and if assurances from Rwanda about conditions for asylum seekers can be relied upon.
Reuters News filed that report. It's time for our health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent with the latest on child malnutrition. Hello, Linord.
Hello, Esther. Hello, everyone. United Nations agencies are calling for urgent action to protect the most vulnerable children in the 15 countries hardest hit by an unprecedented food and nutrition crisis. Conflict, climate shocks, the ongoing impact of COVID-19, and rising costs of living are increasing the number of children acutely malnourished, while key health, nutrition, and other life-saving services are becoming less accessible. Currently, more than 30 million children in the 15 worst affected countries suffer from wasting or acute malnutrition, and 8 million of these children are severely wasted, the deadliest form of undernutrition. This is a major threat to children's lives and to their long-term health and development, the impacts of which are felt by individuals, their communities, and their countries.
The call to action is released by the UN organization to ask for greater attention and greater investment to address the dramatic crisis of malnutrition which we are seeing as a result of combination of climate shocks, conflicts, economic downturns, and COVID-19. Which have increased the number of malnourished children. The governments of the countries that are worst affected can mainstream the management of acute malnutrition in their health services, but they can also have adequate social protection programs for the families of those vulnerable children. They can strengthen food security. They can make the access to safe water and sanitation accessible to all. And the donor countries can scale up and focus their resources to the countries and to the services to address severe acute malnutrition.
That was Dr. Francesco Branco, Director of Nutrition and Safety with the World Health Organization. 247 million people suffered from malaria in 2021. That's an increase of 2 million cases from 2020, according to the WHO's World Malaria Report 2022, released in December. 619,000 people lost their lives to the mosquito-borne disease, and most of them were children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. For more on the fight against malaria, I spoke with Dr. Corine Karema, Interim Chief Executive Officer of the RBM Partnership. Take a look.
The fights against malaria remain precarious, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where the malaria burden remains very high. We are seeing more insecticide and drug resistance. There is, of course, the COVID impact that has affected and disrupted the malaria services. And there is also limited funding that is posing an added challenge to the disease control efforts. So in terms of the numbers, when we look at the WHO World Malaria Report of 2021, so there were 214 million malaria cases and 627,000 lives were lost to malaria, which is an increase of 69 deaths compared to the year before.
Recently, there was results of a clinical trial with the Oxford University research in partnership with researchers in Burkina Faso that found that a vaccine against malaria was efficacious for at least 80%. What is your reaction when you see this kind of research in terms of the future impact of malaria control?
We are grateful that we are seeing new and innovation tools like the vaccine. We are seeing many vaccine candidates for malaria. We are also seeing a new generation of mosquito nets that are being developed and showing that they can protect and prevent malaria in area where we have insecticide resistance. I see we have a lot in terms of innovation in the pipeline. So this is really great. But we also need to use well the resources that are available. So we have seen there are many countries now, we have 25 countries that are eliminating malaria. They've used the existing tools. We have hope. We are seeing there are countries, and with the innovation that we have in pipeline, as well as the gene drive, the mosquito genetically modified, those are really innovation that are also going to be added to the existing tools and combined together can help us to reach our targets to end malaria.
When will we see the end of malaria?
It's not acceptable to die from malaria today because this is a preventable and treatable disease. So for us to stay ahead of the challenges and ultimately end malaria, we need, first of all, to use correctly the available resources, use data to target the hard to reach population, and also tailor our intervention based on the malaria transmissions, and then funding also, more funding for us. And those are the most three important, in addition to the strong health system to help us to end malaria for good.
And finally, what are some current priorities for the RBM partnership?
The RBM partnership will continue to work to keep malaria high on global health and political agenda, particularly to mobilize more resources, more partners, and galvanize commitment from government and the private sector, and by promoting a multilateral response to malaria elimination. So we will continue to work with governments and partners across the world to mobilize resources, and this is invested to maximum effect by, first of all, facilitating sharing of quality data to drive better decision making, transparency, as well as accountability. Second, to support countries, of course, to optimize the quality and effectiveness of their malaria program. And then the last one is to support the deployment and scale up of new malaria tools, all the innovation and approaches.
And thank you, Linord, for that wonderful health segment. Be sure to watch Linord Moudou's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. Thank you for watching Africa 54.